It's 12:02. I think we can get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the Plastic Free July webinar that we're having today. My name is Adrienne Esposito. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. I'm joined today by my colleagues in the Long Island Sound Coastal Watershed Network, which is the Nature Conservancy, and also Save the Sound. And we are delighted to have you. You've been hearing the news, you've been reading the reports. Plastic pollution is now on the forefront of our minds. Apparently, it's also in our bodies. It apparently is in our brain, our hearts, on our tables that we're eating it, and in our waterways, our finfish, and so on. So there's a lot of questions surrounding plastic pollution and what can be done and how to avoid it. And what really are the environmental and public health consequences of plastic pollution? So in order to answer your very important questions, we have two really phenomenal experts with us today, who I'm just going to mention who they are. So today we are delighted to have with us Dr. Jason White. Dr. White is the director of the Connecticut Agriculture Experiment Station, which is the oldest agriculture experiment station in the country. It has a research program on emerging contaminants on the environment and in our food, as well as sustainable nanotechnology-enabled agriculture. How Dr. White's finding the time to be with us, I do not know. His PhD is in environmental toxicology from Cornell, and he also has secondary appointments from Yale University and the University of Massachusetts. We're delighted to have him. We are also delighted to be joined today by Katharine Owens. Dr. Owens is a professor and chair of the Department of Politics, Economics, and International Studies at the University of Hartford in Connecticut. She's a National Geographic Explorer and a Fulbright Fellow. She's an interdisciplinary scholar who merges science, policy, and the arts on the topic of plastic pollution. She's worked on plastic pollution projects ranging from India to the Arctic Circle. So once again, we're delighted to have both of these speakers participating with us, educating us, and also they'll be available to answer our questions. So I just want to mention to everybody, please, as you hear the speakers speak, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will be monitoring it. We're going to get to as many questions as we can. We might not be able to get to all of them. Many of you were sending questions even before this workshop started. So we've also have been looking at those and wading through those as well. So we'll try to do our best, and please bear with us. So let me just say also that this program is a program brought to you by the Clean Water Network, which, as I mentioned, is a partnership between Citizens Campaign for the Environment, the Nature Conservancy, and Save the Sound. We've also have engaged over 600 plus municipalities, nonprofit organizations, agencies, scientists, and others in this project. And we've had 15 events so far, and we're delighted that you can join us for this one, and we're looking forward to it. Next slide. Melissa, why don't you answer people's questions? So many of the questions that we got from all of you is, how do I limit plastic pollution and my plastic use? And Melissa's going to give you a couple of very easy answers. These are not the only answers. We know it's not going to solve the world's problems with plastic, but everybody is empowered to make a change, and everybody can make a change.
Thanks, Adrienne. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here to learn about how to limit plastic use in your lives and how to solve this problem for the Long Island Sound watershed. So when you registered, you might have answered a question in the registration, and that was, how do you limit plastic use in your daily life? We got amazing answers. We got some really unique ones, but there were also really themes that popped out in these answers. So overwhelmingly, we are using reusable items, from water bottles to mugs, coffee cups, straws, utensils, and that's really inspiring. One of the easiest ways to limit your impact on the environment is to switch to reusable things. And so it's encouraging to see that so many of you are already doing it. And you might look at this word cloud and get some ideas for other ways that you can be limiting plastic use in your life. Um, Things such as being a mindful consumer, choosing the products that you buy with care, maybe buying something in a glass bottle rather than a plastic bottle. And so there are so many ways to be a mindful consumer, choosing which companies that you purchase from, and then down to the individual products. And then just in general, being aware of your environment, getting involved in your community, participating in shoreline cleanups is a great way to get out in the environment and physically remove plastic from the environment. So I hope that these answers inspire you. Thank you to everyone who responded. This is really great for us to see how everyone is getting involved and reducing plastic use in their lives. And I'm going to pass it off to our speakers
Well,
and back to
I'm gonna,
Adrian.
yeah, okay. Okay, so my 2 cents is for everyone, it's the summer. Please, please, if you can do one thing, do not leave any kind of a plastic water bottle in your car and let it heat up and then cool down and then drink the water. Do not do that. That's my public service announcement for today. Okay, next slide. We'd like to introduce today, as I said, our wonderful first speaker is going to be Dr. Jason White. Jason, you are up.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that.
Yes.
Okay, as noted, I'm the director of the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, and wanted to quickly cover some of the work we've been doing on plastics in the environment. The Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station is a kind of a state-run research laboratory. There's about 110 of us that work here, and about a dozen or so are working on different aspects of emerging contaminants, which obviously includes plastics. So I don't think we need to spend too much time on this slide. I think we all have an understanding of what some of the issues are with plastics. And I think what has become clearer more recently is what the risk associated with exposure to all these plastic materials is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in terms of food and agriculture. And then I also did want to touch base on two kind of human health studies. Not my area of expertise, but I do know they're of interest. So the approach that we've taken at the experiment station is we're concerned specifically with micro and nanoplastics. So let me get my pointer here. So the breakdown you can kind of see here, and it's really based on size. So when most of us think about a plastic, which we would call a macroplastic, these are things that are larger than about half a centimeter. That's the kinds of things you see over here. But what happens over time with these materials in the environment is they break down, they become physically smaller. So when you have a material that's below 5 millimeters, then we would call that a microplastic. And then when you start getting to pieces of plastic that are in this nanoscale range, less than 1 micrometer or 1,000 nanometers, then that's when we have a nanoplastic. And this is of concern because as materials in general get smaller, they get to be more reactive and potentially more toxic. So how does this happen in the environment? There's a variety of processes that do this: ultraviolet radiation, just mechanical forces, high temperature. So I think what we need to consider is, when you think about an area of land or soil or water and the plastics that are in it, what you have is a combination of all of these macro, micro, and nanoplastics, and it's dynamic. Over time, things will break down and get smaller. So our interest is specifically in agriculture, and it's interesting because when you look at the scientific literature, there's actually been a fair amount of work in aquatic systems, but there's far less done in terrestrial systems, and specifically in soils that are used to grow food. And this is a concern because there's actually lots of different pathways by which plastics will get into agricultural soils, whether it's biosolids application, or actually many of the coatings that are on seeds, fertilizers, and pesticides are plastics. And contaminated water. And in New England, we actually use a significant quantity of these mulch films. So we actually had a workshop in Montreal at McGill University in 2023 where we kind of highlighted these different exposure pathways. So for a toxicologist, I'm an environmental toxicologist, plastics are kind of an interesting case, because by design, plastics are actually designed to be inert, and inert things generally are not toxic. But the issue is, even if they are inert, our exposure, the dose that we are experiencing is just exceptionally high. In addition to that, we know plastics have toxic additives, and we also know, as we just talked about, that many of these plastics will break down into smaller and smaller particles that actually may be more reactive and more toxic. So it's these micro and nanoplastics that we've chose to focus on, and our first grant that we are working on actually was looking specifically at how a micro and nanoplastic could actually interact with and impact the mobility or toxicity of other environmental pollutants, things like arsenic, for example, which is what you see here. So this is a grant we submitted in 2023, and it was funded. It'll actually end next year, but we're looking at least at a one-year extension, maybe 2 years. It was through Rutgers, the Experiment Station, and New Jersey Institute of Technology. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of what we're working on here, basically exposing plants to micro and nanoplastics with or without a second contaminant, and then seeing what happens in terms of that plant. So this is the type of experiment that we're looking at. This is a paper we just published this year where we're really focused in on how important the size of the plastic is. So we looked at polystyrene, which is one of the most common plastics, but we looked at it at 2 different sizes, a really small nanoplastic and then one that's kind of on that nanoplastic microplastic barrier. But we grow plants either in hydroponics or in soil. We expose them to the environmental pollutants, which in this case is arsenic, and boscolid is a fungicide. Alone, we expose them alone or in combination with these micro and nanoplastics, these polystyrene at different concentrations. So what you see over here is when you look at these in hydroponic systems, both the plastics and the pollutants were toxic. And we did lettuce and wheat. This is just the lettuce data. And that's kind of what you see here. But the interesting thing is when you're in soil, the toxicity is less evident. But what was really important from this work is what we showed with when you had a co-exposure with both the polystyrene, the plastic, and arsenic. And that's what you kind of see over here. So when you have this nanoplastic with the arsenic, you actually end up getting significantly more arsenic moving into the plant. So one contaminant is increasing the availability of another, in this case, arsenic into lettuce. The other interesting thing is you see the opposite. So you're interested in how the plastic affects the arsenic, for example, but does the arsenic affect the plastic? And the answer is yes. So tracking plastics in plants is a little more difficult. We use 2 techniques. One is microscopy method, and another is something called pyrolysis, GCMS. But the key point here is that in the presence of both arsenic and boscolid, what you actually see is that the nanoplastic, this nanoscale polystyrene, actually increases as well. So this is the amount of the nanoplastic in the lettuce when it was just the plastic exposure alone. But when arsenic was in there, you had a dramatic increase. So the 2 contaminants are interacting with each other and increasing, the risk to our food supply. So this is another experiment that we were looking at. This one we haven't published it yet, but we're looking at weathering. So obviously we know when a plastic sits out in the environment, over time, it gets smaller. We already talked about that. But the other thing that happens is its chemistry changes. The surface changes as it ages or weathers. And much of the scientific literature kind of ignores that point. So we wanted to look at a different plastic, polyvinyl chloride, but we wanted to see how important this weathering or aging process is. So we also expanded our list of contaminants. We're looking at arsenic, chromium, lead, boscolid, and we added in PFAS as well. But the same exact setup as before. So you're exposing a plant to the environmental contaminant alone or in the presence of the plastic. So what you see over here, this is the total amount in the lettuce for arsenic, for chromium, and for lead. And what you see, this first bar, in each case, this is just the pollutants by themselves. But when the plastic is present, you see a significant increase, again, in the amount of arsenic, chromium, and lead showing up in these plants. And this is the shoots, this is the roots, this is the whole plant. But what's interesting and important is that most of the time, the amount that you find, if the plastic was weathered or aged, you actually get that increase is even greater in terms of the contaminant moving into the plant. So I just wanted to put this up here. This is the number of papers that we've been publishing since 2022 on this topic, just to show you it's a very active area of research in our group, and it's something that we're very concerned about. So in just the last few minutes, the other thing I wanted to do is talk a little bit about 2 human toxicity studies. This is not my area of expertise, but I know this is an area of concern for a lot of people. So I picked 2 recent studies. This one was published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year. And the investigators here were trying to correlate micro and nanoplastic exposure to cardiovascular disease. So what they did was for patients that were undergoing this process of plaque removal for the carotid arteries, what the investigators did is they looked in those plaques for micro and nanoplastics. And they used the same exact techniques that we were using, and then they tried to correlate that exposure, those micro and nanoplastics in the plaque in the carotid artery, to some sort of health endpoint with a focus on heart attack, stroke, and death occurring up to 36 months after this experiment, after this was started. So the short story here is so they had 304 patients, of which 257 completed the full study, but about 58% of those patients actually had micro and nanoplastics, specifically polyethylene, in their plaques. And 31 of them also had a second plastic, PVC, polyvinyl chloride. And they could see this in terms of microscopy. They could see it in terms of the methods that we were using, this pyrolysis, GCMS. And by looking at this data, they were actually able to make a statistical correlation between plastic presence in the carotid artery plaque to a higher risk of heart attack, stroke, and death 34 months outside of the study. So this was a really significant finding. And another study that just came out this year was actually focused on one of the additives, which is DEHP, diethyl phthalate. Interestingly enough, 28 years ago, this was a contaminant I worked on for my PhD. But the same thing, trying to correlate this to cardiovascular disease. And as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the concerns with plastics is the toxicity of the additives. So the approach here was actually to use data from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. And what this allowed was a much bigger data set. And they correlated those data on cardiovascular mortality with DEHP exposure estimates. And again, looking at health outcomes, including excess deaths, and years of life lost. So again, huge data set here. So they were able to correlate 356,000 plus deaths directly to DEHP exposure. And that DEHP, 349,000 times, could actually be directly correlated to the plastic. So that is a significant correlation of mortality with exposure to this particular additive in plastics. So there was lots of other stuff in this study, but I think the major point here is 2 recent studies, you're correlating significant negative health impacts with micro and nanoplastic exposure. Just to jump back to our work and conclude, micro and nanoplastics is really a significant issue, both in terms of impacting the effects of other contaminants in the system, but also on themselves. So we're spending a lot of time now trying to understand the mechanisms, and by understanding the mechanisms, we can create interventions for this process. We're part of a large group that's going to be going for a $10 million NIEHS, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, Superfund grant to actually address some of these issues. But I think I probably went too long, so I am going to stop sharing.
No, it wasn't too long. It was just perfect. Thank you. Before we move on to Dr. Owens, I do want to ask one question that was also in the chat, but also I think in maybe many of our minds. The question was by Anne. Why does the presence of the microplastics increase the level of arsenic and lead and other heavy metal contaminants? Can you just speak to that for 2 minutes?
Sure. So the real answer is we don't know yet, but there's a couple of possibilities. One of which is things stick to plastic, right? So if you have a very small nanoscale plastic particle, arsenic could stick to it, and the plastic could move in more effectively than the arsenic alone. The other thing that can happen is these plastics have plasticizers, which are toxic. They could damage the plant roots and make the plant roots basically more leaky. So things are more effective at getting in because the plant itself has been damaged. It's probably one of those two mechanisms, and we need to tease that out.
Okay, thank you so very much. Okay, there's lots of questions popping in the chat. Everyone, please don't forget, put your questions in the chat so we can get to them. But we're going to move on to our next speaker and our final speaker. We're very excited, as I said earlier, to have Dr. Katharine Owens with us. Dr. Owens is coming to us as a professor and chair of the Department of Politics, Economics, and International Studies at the University of Hartford. Dr. Owens, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. You can see my slides, yes? Yeah, I see nods. All right.
Yes, yes.
So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to jump right in. I've been researching water policy for about the last 20 years and plastic pollution for about a decade. And this chart just very briefly shows global plastic production over time. And you can see it has increased greatly. You probably already know that. In the 1950s, we were producing about 5 million tons per year. And now it's upward of 400 million tons each year. And when you read the materials put forward by the plastics industry, they make it clear that their goal is to increase this number each year. And because you're I assume, very well-informed group, you know that recycling is complicated. 95% of plastic packaging globally is not recycled, and 90.5% of all plastic ever made has never been recycled. And that's because these materials were not designed to be recycled. Recycling is really something that we add on after the fact. It's a market. Better about that. There we go. I was frozen a little bit. Hopefully I'm okay now. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the impact of plastic in the environment. Plastic's a very useful resource, we know that, but some of the things that make it useful can also make it problematic in the environment. Plastics don't break down quickly, taking from decades to centuries to break down. As Dr. White was pointing out, they degrade, they just don't biodegrade. And so as they break into smaller and smaller components, the chemicals embedded in that material seep out into our soils or oceans. Plastic debris costs an incredible amount of money to clean up, and those costs are most frequently borne by we, the people, by taxpayers, because it is government at every level that is usually working to clean up our environment, our parks, our shorelines, etc. Most plastics are still made from virgin fossil fuels because that's the cheapest and easiest way to make plastic. But at every stage in its life, plastic worsens the issue of climate change. But I'm going to focus, because of the focus of my project, I'm going to talk about the impact on wildlife a little bit more. And to do that, I'm going to share the story of Lord Howe Island, which is off the coast of Australia. It's a place that about 500 people and 44,000 shearwaters call home. And there's a researcher named Jen Lavers who's been doing work there for about 20 years. And she said that when they first started trying to understand what birds there were ingesting, they would do sampling, and they would find on average about 75% of the samples they took, those birds had 5 to 10 pieces of plastic in their stomachs. Over time, this has increased so that all of the birds that they're encountering have more than 50 pieces of plastic in their stomachs. And they have a record winner every year. And this year's record winner was an 80-day-old chick with more than 700 pieces of plastic in its stomach. So this made the news recently because when they have audio files where when they pick up those birds to test them, you can hear the plastic crunching from outside of their bodies because their stomachs are so full. Now, even if it's not at that level, which is definitely not good. Those animals are not surviving with 700 pieces of plastic in their stomachs. But even if it's far less, what's happening is that it's taking up literal space in their stomachs in a way that makes it impossible for them to take in the calories they need to grow and thrive, and for birds, fledge. The other issue for wildlife is that of entanglement. And this is an Australian fur seal that unfortunately did not survive its encounter with this pretty small piece of twine. They taxidermied the results to use it as a teaching tool down at Phillips Island Nature Park in Victoria, Australia. But again, what's important to understand is even if an entanglement doesn't kill the animal, it can make them sick. It can make them less able to compete. It can make them more open to predation. And so it can have a significant impact on their lives. So what we know about the different species that are affected by entanglement and ingestion comes from researchers who have just gone through all of the literature and gleaned from it records of entanglement, ingestion, or both. And the first person to do that in 1997, David Laced, at that time, found that more than 250 different species were affected. And other researchers who updated that work in 2015 found that by that time, the number had more than doubled. So even though this is dire, I want you to keep in mind that researchers believe this is a problem that we can solve if we actually address the root of the problem, right? Which is this graph of just the extreme amount of plastics that we're producing every year. So having read this literature, I applied for funding from NOAA in 2016. And the idea behind that project is that I would take my University of Hartford students down to Hammonasset at Meigs Point. And we would collect debris, try to understand what this big global problem looks like in our backyard, analyze what we found, and share the results with politicians. So we did that, and in just a couple of hours on Meigs Point, we found over 1,600 individual pieces of debris. It was overwhelmingly comprised of plastic. And when we analyzed it, we found it was what we would call municipal waste. It was the kinds of things that you would recognize, like cigarette butts and water bottles. So based on that work, I applied for funding from the Fulbright Foundation to go and live in Thiruvananthapuram, India with my family for 6 months in 2019. And I just replicated that project. We went out into to coastlines, we collected debris, we analyzed what we found and shared the results with politicians. And the story was very much the same. Overwhelmingly, what we were finding was comprised of plastic, and it was municipal waste. And with support from the National Geographic Society, I was able to bring together these 33 scholars from around India to come down to Kerala to learn the methods so that we could replicate that project even more. But the take-home message is that every collection we did had similar results, which is no matter how much plastic we were finding, it was how much material we were finding, it was overwhelmingly made of plastic, and it was municipal waste. So some of those researchers were able to return to their communities and collect debris across India, which led to more than 33,000 individual pieces of debris being picked up, which was fantastic. And then a little something called the pandemic happened and all of this blew up, and not in the good way. And as I was stuck at home in distress, really, I started thinking about the story we tell about plastic pollution. It's very common in the scientific literature for researchers to say things like, these are the 10 worst polluting countries in the world, or these are the 10 dirtiest rivers in the world. And they are always talking about the developing world, and most frequently about South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I've had, basically like a minute's worth of experience in one South Asian country. But that characterization doesn't match with my own experiences, because I know that our friends and colleagues and neighbors in India, go to the store and do exactly what my family does when we go to the store, which is, even if we care about this problem a lot, even if we go into the grocery store with a canvas bag, almost everything in there is wrapped in plastic. And so I thought it doesn't make a lot of sense that we're presenting as if we in the United States have solved this problem, because we have not solved this problem. We're just much better at hiding that problem. And so using my arts background, I decided that I wanted to try to tell what I believe is a more honest story about the way people like me interact with plastic pollution. So I wanted to reflect basically my own experiences. And to do that, I decided to create life-size portraits of the different species for which we have records of both entanglement and ingestion. And I do this by hand sewing those unrecyclable film plastics onto canvas to create the portraits. Now they're all life-size, and I'll share just a few of them with you so you can kind of get a sense of the project or feel for the work that I'm doing. And then it got times on my list of species affected by entanglement and ingestion. There are several whales and large sharks. And so I thought it's just more fun and interesting if I take these out into the community and I work with the community to create those pieces. We've done over 10 of those whales so far. I'm going to share a few of them. This one we call Bradley because he's been living at the airport for the last 2 years. But I'll share just a couple of those with you so you can get a sense of some of these. And I really look forward to hearing your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was beautiful art. I think we all enjoyed it. Okay, we're going to go to some of the questions right now in the chat. I'm going to go to you, Jason, first.
Okay.
Because there was a question. Oh, yes. Does the plastic affect the ability for the plants to survive, or does it affect the way they grow or the rate of growth? Is there any, I don't know, maybe you haven't even studied this, but have you seen any correlation between microplastics and plants' ability to grow?
Generally not. I mean, in the laboratory, we can expose a plant, lettuce, wheat, zucchini, whatever, to a concentration of a plastic that will cause toxicity to the plant, will make it not grow well. But generally speaking, those concentrations are much higher than what you actually find in the environment. We have a 70-acre farm that we own and operate, and like many farms in New England, we've been using plastic mulch. We don't use it anymore, but we've been using it for literally decades, and the crops grow just fine. So that's one of the reasons we actually tried to focus on this issue of the plastic impacting other contaminants that are already going to be in an agricultural soil, because we got concerned that that interaction could increase the availability of both. And that seems to be what's happening. And just because and we all know this, right? Just because the lettuce itself is healthy doesn't mean it's not loaded with arsenic or plastics that is not healthy for anything that eats the lettuce. So generally speaking, we don't look for direct toxicity and we don't expect to see it.
Okay, thank you. And just while we're on that topic, I'll just get this one in also from Peter. He says, I believe you used the term interjector in relationship to inhibiting the impacts of plastics on plant uptake of other toxins such as lead and arsenic. Could you share some of the leading examples of this process?
Right. So the term was interventions. So basically, if you got plastic in a soil, how do you grow a crop in that soil without getting the plastic into the food that you're growing? So there's a couple of ways. One is you can actually add soil amendments, and this is one of the areas that we're researching right now. Things like biochar, you can actually change the structure of it so that it will bind to the plastic. So you're not really getting rid of the plastic, but you're keeping it in the soil and you're keeping it out of your food. And another comment that Katharine just put in there is there are microorganisms that actually can break down plastics. Generally speaking, they're pretty rare, but you could grow them in large numbers and add that fungi or that bacteria to the soil to get degradation. So those are just two of the strategies. The downside is that, again, because the plastic contamination levels in the soil aren't super high, it's going to be pretty expensive to try and remediate, a contaminated farm field. So I mentioned this big center that we're thinking of going for. One of the things we're going to try and do is come up with new strategies, innovative strategies that would work on a much larger scale.
That would be great. Okay, we're going to go to Susan. Avoiding plastic use is ideal. Yes, we agree, Susan. That said, there are so many plastic items already in our lives. What's the safest way to dispose of the existing plastic items, especially those that are not recycled by our municipalities? And for those of you who don't know, each municipality, unfortunately, has a different recycling process. I know here on Long Island, some of them take numbers 1 through 7. Some of them only take numbers 6 and 7. Some only take numbers 1, 5, and 7. It's ridiculous, actually. So I just want to go to our presenters and see if you have any recommended ways to recycle materials that you think is the best way to manage our waste stream, our plastic waste stream.
I'm going to let Professor Owens answer that question first.
You are so generous.
I don't think we have a lot of great options, honestly. I mean, that now we used to say reduce, reuse, recycle. Now they say refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. But we all know, right, that there are items that we can't avoid and they are not recyclable. When I give presentations, I usually try to encourage people to talk to the people who make things and ask them to package them or to make them differently. And then do things like we have refill stores in my town, in Middletown, options like that might allow us to avoid especially single-use plastics. But they're all around us, and until the people who make things change, it's going to be a difficult problem for us.
Okay. And where is the plastic dump in the Pacific Ocean? Asked Bruce.
The gyres there are 5 gyres around the world. It's relatively near the Midway Islands. It's larger than the state of Texas, and it's a place just because of currents where debris has always accumulated. But now that because that debris is mostly plastic, it hangs around for decades.
Okay. Deb is asking about clean fill in mulch. I don't know if this is for this seminar. How can we get government to be more engaged in enforcing the clean fill, mulch, etc.? I don't know if that's probably not in your area. Okay, let's go down here. So in these gyres, is there a way of tracking the origin of plastic pollution? Seems like a long shot, but curious if we could track the origins of the plastic, then, we could hopefully address more of the root cause.
I mean, the material that's been in the gyres, some of it has been there for decades. So we've sort of passed the point of being able to. There are people who do cleanups and they look at labeling and stuff like that to try to understand where things have come from. And I know some other National Geographic explorers have done projects in India where they tag material in the Ganges and see where it goes so they can better understand the patterns of the way things move around the world. But in terms of the gyres, I think it's sort of like past that point. I mean, what we can do now is try to prevent more material from going out there.
Yes. Okay, Anna from Holbrook is saying she's just back from France. I wish I could say that. There, the Starbucks use totally recyclable cups and lids. And why isn't that happening in the United States?
I mean, I think it's because we don't demand more and our policy isn't reflecting that. Someone brings me Kit Kat wrappers from Japan, where the bags of Kit Kats are in paper, not in plastic. So I think it's all about our policies and also what our manufacturers, think we want. And right now, plastic is seen as hygienic, right, and durable, and so that's the default.
And I'll feel free to add to that. It's also about lobbying ability. As someone who lobbies in Albany, we'll be in DC next week. Industry and businesses are very intense in their lobbying. They don't want to change unless they feel that they can make a profit with that change. So part of it is laws work. When we make legislation and we incentivize or mandate that an industry change, they do change and they will change, but those laws have to get passed. And we know from here in New York, particularly, and also from Connecticut, to reduce plastic and paper packaging materials, which is fought tooth and nail by every industry on the planet when the bill comes up. We know that their lobbying is effective. They spend a lot of money working against these environmental bills. That's the harsh truth. I think it was reported this year against the packaging reduction bill, which a lot of us worked so hard on for 7 years in a row. It passed the Senate this year. It had enough votes in the Assembly. The Speaker of the Assembly held the bill. And then the news report comes out that the Business Council spent like almost $250 million in their lobbying efforts. So, of course, there's a correlation between the amount spent opposing a bill and the fact the bill doesn't come up for a vote. And in fact, I'm going to do a little commercial message here. If you want to get involved in that campaign next year, please shoot me an email, putting my email in the chat, and we can make you part of our citizens, you know, activated citizens registry when we need calls and emails to go to elected officials at key times in the campaign. It'd be great to add your voice to that. That would be wonderful. So please feel free to do that. Okay. Now I'm a coordinator. This is from John. I'm a coordinator for the K through 12 Marine Science program in Norwalk, Connecticut. How can I get my students and teachers involved in reducing plastic pollution? Are there any local established programs we can partner with, or any grants available to support K through 12 students in plastic pollution reduction? And also, we may want to have Peter chime in with that after our speakers go.
I do know that Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Conservation does have a plastics program. I'm not sure of the specifics of it. I also know that they do have community outreach as a primary core of their mission. They may or may not have small grants available, so that would be one place to check. My institution, we're more research based, but also public outreach is a part of what we do. We have a range of speakers that can come to you, or you can bring your students here for a visit and we can give a tour, do things like that.
Great. Peter, do you have anything you want to throw in there?
You put me on the spot there, Adrian.
Well, I know you guys do a lot of schoolwork, so
yeah, we do a fair amount.
Yeah.
John and I believe, met actually at the Long Island Sound Coastal Watershed Summit. So let's follow up, maybe, and anyone else that's interested, you can follow up directly with me. We do a lot of beach cleanups and quantification of pollutants on beaches, and plastics included, and that might be a good opportunity for the students to get involved with, but happy to look at other options as well. I'll drop my email in the chat, name and email.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I also Zoom into schools and visit schools almost on a weekly basis, year round. So, and also bring the whale I'm working on to schools to have people to participate in that as well.
Oh, good to know that. Okay, Jason, what are the type of soil amendments are recommended, and what kind of mulch would you recommend, being an agricultural expert?
Well, I recommended for plant growth, or recommended to kind of keep plastics out of plants?
Susan's question just says are recommended. Let's say recommended to keep plastics out of your plants. We'll start with that.
So that is a brand new area of research. So I don't really have a question, or I don't really have an answer to that question. We have used we have another program on PFAS, which is obviously another environmental contaminant, and we've shown that certain kinds of biochar will actually bind to PFAS in the soil to keep the PFAS out of the plant. So our belief is that you can use a similar approach for plastics, but we haven't had a chance to demonstrate that yet.
Okay. And what about hydroponic vegetables and fruits? Do they have the same ability or chance to absorb particular plastic particles from the water, or do you think that might be a better way to go?
It's a different way to go. I mean, one thing,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, one thing to consider is most of the hardware associated with a hydroponic system, a lot of it's plastic, right? So, and if you have that out in a greenhouse under high temperature and light, those plastic pipes and containers and things like that will break down over time. I don't know if you end up with more or less exposure than if you're growing plants in soil. So I don't know if anybody specifically looked at that yet. But I think one of the things that, we're learning here today, and maybe knew already, is it's going to be difficult to not have an exposure to plastics. So it's going to be about minimizing, finding conditions where you can minimize that chance. And yes, you could, the question, I staring at the chat, for hydroponics, yes, you can use glass, but it's more expensive and obviously more likely to break and create other issues.
Then instead of little microplastics, you'll have shards of glass in your strawberries. Okay. Again, Jane has asked a couple of times. I just don't know if these folks will know this, Jane. It says most plastics that are recycled on Long Island are actually not recycled. They're not reused. And do they actually end up in a waste to energy plant? I'll take that and just say, that I think a lot of plastics do end up, I don't think I know, in the waste to energy plants, particularly because many or most of the towns on Long Island are really now limiting their recycling to number 1 and number 6 and number 7. So we have a lot of 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. And then we have a lot of people that gave up recycling altogether because by the time they turn the plastic over and try to find the number and then understand if their municipality takes that number or not, is another whole thing. We feel very strongly that plastic recycling must be made easily understandable for the public and convenient. And deciphering numbers, especially if you are over 40 and maybe can't see those little tiny numbers on the clear plastic or the white plastic, and then you're trying to figure out if it's recyclable. This whole system needs an overhaul. The whole system's not working. And yes, to answer your question, not all the material, but a lot of the material ends up in a waste to energy plant. Okay, I really love Amanda's question. If you both could say one thing to a friend who's skeptical about reducing or avoiding plastic pollution in their daily routine, what would it be? Putting you both on the spot.
I would say, I think a lot of times we're very hard on ourselves, and because we can't do it perfectly, we just throw in the towel. So I'm often encouraging people to just do the best they can, understanding that we're all limited. As you said, the system is set up and it doesn't work, right? So we're just trying to function within that system. So I would say even small actions can make a big difference.
Yeah, I would say that she took my answer. No, that's an excellent point. I mean, the scope of the problem is so huge. So therefore, every person making individual decisions, moving in the right direction, reducing plastic or using plastics that can be recycled. I think every little bit makes a difference.
I totally agree. And I just want to tell you guys, when we first banned plastic bags, it first happened actually in Suffolk County, where we put a fee on plastic bags. People went crazy. It was like, we called it the bag apocalypse, because people got angry and there were arguments at the grocery store and they had to bring their own bag. 3 weeks later, it was not an issue. People didn't care. They brought their own bags to the grocery store. And, 3 months later, it was hailed as being so wise. And, in the first year we saved, I don't remember what the number was, but it was billions of plastic bags were no longer being used. And then the state did it, and then other areas did it as well. So, sometimes I think to those people who are skeptical, sometimes you start out with small steps, and then those steps can lead to, walking a mile or two, and then, God forbid, but taking a run. So you have to take your change a little bit at a time, and that leads to big efforts. Exactly, I think what Kate was saying earlier. Okay, plastic PVC plumbing is used in all new construction. Is it shedding plastic into our water?
I would say most likely not, and if so, at very, very low quantities. I mean, the PVC that's used in hydroponics, that's out in an open environment in high temperature greenhouses with direct exposure to UV light. Using PVC in plumbing, it's either underground, it's in the house, and it's much more stable. And the PVC in hydroponics, I'm assuming that it's the same stuff that's used year after year after year, and the older it gets, the more likely it is an issue. So the answer to your question is, well, the real answer is I don't know for sure, but I suspect no.
Great, thank you. Tomer says, I'd also like to argue that putting recycling onus on the consumer is not addressing the root cause. Couldn't agree with you more. We'd like to offer you a job. No, just kidding. Kate?
I was just going to say, the recycling framework has changed drastically since, I think it was in 2019 when China implemented the national sword policy.
Yes.
And that's when they stopped taking our recycling waste. And I don't blame them. But our systems have been in crisis, I would say, since then. And so even the things that were there for which there was a market for recycling at that time, a lot of that market has just crumpled because of that change in international policy.
Absolutely. This actually might be for Save the Sound. Hold on, I'm sorry. James would like to know that if there are groups in the East Lyme, Old Lyme, Waterford region that are doing anything with local beach cleanups, monitoring for plastic pollution. He wants to form a local beach and boater uses. That's actually a great idea in the region. And he wants to know if there's a coordinated effort.
Yeah, thanks. I dropped my contact in. We definitely have a coordinated coastal cleanup effort that includes the area you're talking about. And we'd love to get you involved and this group of boat beach users involved. So please follow up with me and I'll get you in touch with our coordinator on that. And we can definitely get set up and get you linked into a larger effort.
Great, thanks. Katharine just was asking how many stores are getting around the plastic bag ban by putting out the very sturdy plastic bags. I don't know about Connecticut, but I can tell you in New York that was an issue in the beginning until they realized how much they cost, and then they got shamed, and now hardly any of them are doing that anymore. So it was an issue, and I believe that issue has really remedied itself. Some of them still do it, but by and large, it really is very few. Okay. Paul wants to know who's working on a comprehensive restructuring of the whole system. Sorry. Paul, I don't think anybody's working on a restructuring of the whole system just yet. Been doing the work a couple of decades, and I think change doesn't happen from the top down. It really does happen on the grassroots level and then grows up. So I think what a lot of us are working to do is pass local and statewide laws that require different types of packaging, minimize packaging, and we're working on the law that puts the onus back on the producer and the manufacturer for reducing plastic, not using plastic, or if or when they use plastic, that it should be more recyclable, and to make that recycled materials more consistent. There's no reason we're using 1 through 7. We should just be using 1 and 2. And then all our systems should be set up to recycle number 1 and number 2.
Adrienne, in the interest of time, can we take one more question and then wrap up?
Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, we have to take this one. Sorry, I'm playing favoritism. Do plastics have any effect on pollinators? Do any of you know anything about that? That's a great question.
I don't know if anybody's looked at that. We actually have a pollinator scientist here, and she's obviously the kind of conventional concern is pesticide exposure and things like that. But you saw the images Professor Owens was showing. I suspect if you did a dissection on a dead honeybee, you might find plastic particles in its system. Is that a toxicity issue? I'm not sure. I certainly don't know enough about it, but I'm sure given the amount of plastics in the environment, pollinators are definitely exposed to macro, micro, and nanoplastics.
Well, I'm just putting a bug in your ear, every pun intended, that would be a great research project. And I think one that would be fascinating for not only the scientific community, but for the public to have a greater understanding of as well. But let me turn this over to my colleague, Holly from the Nature Conservancy. Holly?
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much to both Dr. White and Dr. Owens for this incredible talk, and to Adrienne as well for facilitating just an amazing conversation. Mostly I want to thank everybody who attended today. You are making this Long Island Sound Coastal Watershed Network, and it's these conversations in the chat and you're raising questions and showing interest in Long Island Sound that really make this network work. I just wanted to let you know that this is our final event for our 2024-2025 season for the Long Island Sound Coastal Watershed Network. However, we want you to keep spreading the word, talking to your friends about what you've learned at these meetings, and we'll be continuing to share our regular updates through our newsletter. And we really want to hear from you today. We're excited to let you know that the new Long Island Sound Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, which I think Melissa's going to pop in the chat for you to see, includes it's very, very aligned with the goals of our Coastal Watershed Network. And we hope to continue working with you and sharing more information over the final parts of this year and then into the next coming years. And there should be a link in the chat for you to fill out or a poll coming up for you to fill out. We really appreciate your sharing information about what you learned and what information you'd like to find, what you'd like to hear about in the future. So thank you all so much for attending, and make sure you're sharing and spreading the word about the network and Long Island Sound.
Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate it.
Bye.